right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It is the Geopolitical Roundtable, and I am your host with the most, the one and only notorious glorious V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live with my main man, El Cuco himself, CJ, the producer extraordinaire, working the airwaves, making sure this broadcast is coming out crispy and clean. You know what I mean? Check out our sponsors, RogueNews.com. It is the place where every single one of our videos ever done has been uploaded to RogueNews.com. It is the place to go for all of our live streams. So if you ever wonder on live stream, just go to Rogue News. We're live streaming right through there, and all our recent shows are on there. All the interviews, it's all there. RogueNews.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at Real Rogue News. And Rogue News on pretty much every single podcasting app known to humanity. We are everywhere you want us to be, plus a bag of chips. And also, check out our paid sponsors, mycbdedibles.com, mycbdedibles.com, for all your CBD edible goodness. It's so good. It's so effective that CJ took it on yesterday's show with Matthew Errett and fell asleep behind the console. He was out cold. True story. And Matthew and I carried a 1-hour show for an additional 42 minutes because the CBDs are so effective. He's not only the president, he's also the client. And with that being said, gentlemen, we got London Paul and Ken, the shotgun Schortgen here. And with that being said, guys, what's going on? How are you guys?
Morning.
Yes, morning, afternoon, evening.
I'm on my second cup of Black Rifle caffeinated coffee. I'm fired up, as you can tell by my introduction. I'm scanning the headlines, wondering what is going on today in Exceptional Stan, and how is it breaking things and destroying things, and how goes the schizophrenic foreign policy and the idiotic monetary intervention? What say you, gentlemen? What's going on with you guys? What is on your radar screens?
Well, I guess to start off, the thing that stands out to me is this is a continuation of the Obama administration.
Yep.
We have a return of ISIS. We have the funding of and build up in Ukraine, arms sales there. We have the rejection of Israel. We have, looks like going after Syria, trying to create havoc. Everything that was left off. You would almost think that John Brennan has suddenly taken over the Biden administration, just the Obama administration. And more than that, right now, they have put President Joe in the basement. They won't even let him speak anymore. There was he was walking by, I think, yesterday, and a couple of interviewers at the press briefing were asking him two simple questions. He goes, I know, and then walked off. That we have been, co-opted. This is one of the biggest reasons why they did the all out to ensure that Trump lost the election, because this is, the same time that the election results came in, all the controversy, it was the same time that the World Economic Forum brought in their Great Reset, the same time that all these, they're trying their last ditch effort to bring about this one world socialist globalist government. It's not going to work, obviously, because China and Russia and everybody else who has joined in with Eurasia is going to reject it. But with that being said, there is going to be so much chaos, not just monetarily, financially, economically, but geopolitically, that's going to be brought about here. We have yet to see what's going to happen here in the next few years.
Ken, what's going to happen is this, okay? The rest of the world in the next 10 years will be planning a manned space mission to Mars. And we in the West, in the United States and in Europe, will be figuring out how many anal swabs we need to do before we can go to the supermarket to buy an apple, a genetically modified apple, nonetheless. And we'll be figuring out, trying to find out who is the 3003rd gender that we can come up with. That's what we'll be doing. What say you, Paul?
Yeah, well, I think what seems to be very apparent, irrespective of whether it was Trump or Biden, is the world now is starting to kind of flex its muscles everywhere. And because it knows the US hegemony on its knees, they know the dollar's on its last legs, they know the Western empires. in its final days, and they're all starting to flex their muscles everywhere and thinking, well, actually, we can see this collapse coming, so we want to sort of stake our claim to not trying to replace the United States, but trying to actually assert themselves a bit more. So you've got Middle Eastern nations who are now trying to assert themselves because they see the demise of the United States. You've got European nations who, on the one hand, are trying to assert themselves, but now Biden's back in, ironically. The Atlanticists who are prevalent inside the European Union are all suddenly wanting to jump back into the US fold. The rest of them don't particularly want to, but hence why if the United States says, let's sanction Russia over Navalny, Europe's now saying, let's sanction Russia over Navalny.
It's so ridiculous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely ridiculous. And so because the world's dramatically changing, even though a lot of people in the West aren't even aware of this, that right. Therefore you're seeing all these dynamics playing out in regions. And the Biden administration, there's some very, very familiar things being done, absolutely no doubt about it, and hardly or remotely a surprise. But on some level, the way the Biden administration's handling Israel is rather reminiscent of when they joined the JCPOA, much to the infuriation of the Israelis at the time. Okay, Trump left, and now they're kind of thinking or looking to try and maneuver their way back in, but trying to get Iran to compromise to some degree on the original deal, which of course Iran will not do. But also there's elements of it that suggests that in fact the Biden administration is trying to throw the Israelis under the bus, which is kind of slightly bizarre.
I think it's going to provide a lot of humor for me in the next coming weeks, Paul.
Yeah, not humor for Netanyahu, but no. So therefore there's all these dynamics in play, and I've kind of made this comment in the last week or two in the UK where I'm calling it the summer of euphoria, because suddenly we've gone from locking everyone down and it's the end, no one knows when anything's going to change, and suddenly the UK government comes out with this roadmap, and then we have a budget today which is basically, Rishi Sunak's turned into Father Christmas. It's like we keep the furlough going until September. No tax rises anywhere for 5 years. We'll raise corporation tax, but not for 2 years. And they're just bending over backwards. They're literally like just printing money and throwing it at everyone. Yep. And they're talking about, well, there's the Euros that were postponed there. You call it soccer, obviously we call it football, and that was postponed from last summer. And now it's going to be this summer, and the UK's going, we'll stage every game. We're going to open the stadiums, we're going to fill it full of people.
Yep.
And all these things like, what about the R number? What R number? We're not interested in that anymore. Well, what about the fact that, you don't know the long-term effects of the vaccine? Well, who cares about that? Let's just move on with everything. And for me, it's kind of just, they've reached the...
They're benevolent. They care about us. They care about our mental health, Paul.
Well, actually, I think they're really frightened at the moment that if they don't do something. Because it's interesting, in the UK, the head of the Metro, I think it was the head of the Metropolitan Police or someone senior, said, because obviously the last couple of weekends ago, the weather was really warm here, everyone went out, everyone went to the beach, etc., and this guy came out and said, the police don't want to get involved in managing this anymore. We've had enough of it. So I think there's a lot of anger and resentment building. The governments realise this, and they basically say, right, we have to go for broke here. Of course, the problem is, come September, if they don't carry on the furlough, millions of people are out of a job. And people looking at this budget going, this is great. The government's doing some amazing things. And as I said to someone on Twitter, you are aware this is just printed money. And if they stop tomorrow, the economy would fall off a cliff edge. But people don't realize. So I think they're just trying to give everyone this euphoric summer. Everything will be wonderful. And then they genuinely think somehow this is the stepping stone to economic revitalization. And then come autumn, as I said, if they don't continue doing it, we're going to have the winter of discontent here. which for anyone who knows their history, in the 70s, we had inflation running at 27%,
Oh, baby,
3-day
here we go.
working weeks, power blackouts, and most of the country was on strike. It's just, well, this difference this time is they won't be on strike; they just won't have a job. But you can see it's just they've reached the point now where they're just having to do something, and I think that's the same across Europe as well. They just happen to be seen to be doing something because they think that the people are running out of patience, which truthfully I think they've reached breaking point, and not of course dealing with all the problems that this has caused, but it's just symptomatic of a collapsing empire and all the other things that we've discussed many times before. But there is this vacuum felt in the world, and certain regions or certain nations are now trying to start flexing their muscles a bit. And I think, ironically, the UK thinks it can start flexing its muscles a bit again from the old colonial days. Not that it wants to be a colonial power, but somehow it can show the world, look, we've regenerated our economy. We came out of this lockdown. Look how great we are. And of course, everybody knows that in the end, it's going to be a spectacular failure.
Yep, absolutely. Ken, what are your thoughts?
Well, besides what Paul had said about Britain, the thing that stands out to me is we're seeing this acceleration of the absolute and complete destruction of Western society culture, even more, I would almost say, than what we had at the end of the Roman Empire. I sent something to Paul yesterday. It was kind of sad and humorous, but Denmark, along with most of the Nordic states, has been taken over by the feminist agenda, and because of that, the birth rates in Denmark have fallen so low that the government, instead of reassessing why nobody wants to get married, nobody wants to have kids, any of this stuff, instead of reassessing the fact that they've gone too far over the edge, they sent out they created a PR campaign, and there was this article where the Danish government is begging men to have sex with feminists.
This is why the
Not
West
that
is
they're
gone.
telling the feminists to stop their bullshit, but no, men have to kowtow to the feminists and please, we need children. And that thing, it goes along the same lines of what we're seeing here in the West. You probably know yesterday, Dr. Seuss was canceled.
Right, because he's a racist pig, Ken. He's a racist pig. Can you remind me what that racist pig said? One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. That sounds racist to me, Ken.
Well, the other thing that stood out to yesterday, amongst other things, was Amazon had to change one of its symbols.
Oh, God.
Now it had a symbol for packaging, and you know how when you take regular tape and close up a package, the tape is at the end is serrated because that's where the teeth cut into it.
Right.
Well, somebody had the audacity to say it looked like a Hitler mustache, so you need to get rid of it. And you have to go. So I don't even think something like an Andy Warhol or a Pollock painting could see that there had anything to do with Hitler, but it doesn't matter. They are destroying every single part of society. There was a professor from University of Pittsburgh who said that the government should force pubic blockers on children without parents' permission. The agenda to bring about this, right now, I don't know if you saw a survey that came out, but of Generation Z, 27% of those who were who voted in that from Generation Z believes in having a transgender relationship.
Ken, I don't know if you realize this, but we're all gay now, man. We're all trans. I'm interspecies, by the way. I'm right now. I'm transitioning into a squirrel. Next week, I feel like peanut butter.
Well,
Paul,
if you wonder who's going to take over the world, guess who came out today and said that homosexuality was a mental disorder?
Chinese, baby.
Yeah.
Yep. It is a mental disorder. That's exactly what it is. And here's the deal, man. Okay. When you look at the multipolar world, all right, they're investing in their men, they're investing in their sciences, they're investing in their mathematics. When you look at over here, Bill, it was just found out, Paul and Ken, that last week that one of the biggest donors to an agency and an organization that is out there touting mathematics as racist, okay,
Yeah, you know who funded that?
Bill and Melinda Gates.
Exactly.
They don't want Western people procreating. They don't want Western people competing in math and sciences. They don't want the West even understanding basic history and economics. The reason for that is they know the West is collapsing, and these idiots like Gates and these members and the Davos degenerates and all these people, they are trying to position themselves in basically a supra-regional failed state as neo-feudal lords. That's what's going to happen in the West. Meanwhile, the multipolar world will continue to prosper. There's going to be a respect for sovereignty of nations, advancements in technology and sciences. And the people in the West are going to fall into a dark age. A dark age where the only tech you'll have is your stupid iPhone. But apart from that, you'll have nothing. And you'll be happy.
Yeah, but you know what this is? If you look back in history, when empires collapse, just all sense of rational thought and reasoning just goes out the window. And unfortunately, it starts to manifest itself in ways that, I mean, I made a tweet basically saying that in years to come, people will look at the insanity of the 2020s, and people will wonder how the hell did this ever happen, and people who live through it will be embarrassed to remember it as a period in history. This is why the only sort of silver lining to this is the economic imperative to actually do something functional. And you know, as much as we just criticize the UK because they're just basically Weimar printing money to keep everyone happy for a few months, they have got some ideas that in principle is kind of mirroring what the Chinese are doing. It's interesting, a few weeks ago Johnson came out and seemed to upset a lot of people, going, I'm a Sinophile and we need to, you know, build ties and relations with the Chinese. They are, and years ago there was quite a lot of investment into the UK from China. We can't say at this point who's investing, but they want to create free ports in the UK. And I can bet your bottom dollar it's the Chinese will ultimately invest in this. So there is a glimmer of hope, and I only say a glimmer, that people are starting to try to do the right thing economically. But we are definitely going through a period of decay. I think it will happen, or is happening, a lot faster than conventional wisdom. He thinks, well, the dollar's going to be here another decade, and which it's not going to be. And things will happen, are happening, that most people aren't aware of. And I think the hammer moment will be rather like Weimar Germany, where there was everything seemed perfectly all right 1 minute, and then literally the next it wasn't, because they'd had nigh on a decade of this collapse in process. And that's the same for the Western, you know, dollar-centric financial system. It's been in collapse, before 2008. 2008 was when they couldn't hide it anymore, but it's been in collapse for well over a decade. That's a long gestation period in this thing. So I think it will happen a lot sooner, but it's always inevitable that when empires collapse, just all sense of rational thought goes out the window, and people latch more and more onto anything and something that they feel they can identify with, or hence the whole Q movement nonsense. There's another example.
Paul, hold on right there. And Paul and Ken, I'd like to ask you, because I don't know if you guys got the memo or if you got the notice, but tomorrow is a very special day.
Yes.
You know what tomorrow is?
Donald
the
Trump's
inauguration.
unveiling. Yeah.
Did you guys didn't get the memo. You guys obviously were not paying attention
No,
to
I
the
just
plan.
said it's Trump's inauguration.
That's it. Did you not know this, guy? Come on, Paul. I'm surprised this went right by your radar. You as well, Ken. Tomorrow's Trump's reorganization.
I am not on that that QAnon bandwagon. I'm sorry. No. As a matter of fact, if you take
missed
a look,
it, Paul, Ken.
I thought his inauguration was at CPAC last week.
CPAC is going global, gentlemen.
This is just indicative of just.
I'm done.
A large parts of the world is looking at Western nations, and I think particularly the US and the UK, and they're just going, "What are you doing?
What is this madness?
What is?" But this is indicative of what happens when empires collapse, but ultimately it boils down to the fact that the West is going to have to, the US, the UK, Western powers are going to have to sit down at some point, like sensible, mature adults, which sounds a contradiction in terms, and they're going to have to sit down with the Eurasian axis and say, okay, we have to admit it's game over. What are we going to do about this? But the chances are their arrogance, their ignorance, their hubris, and everything else will mean that they'll just basically let everything completely implode.
Yep.
And only then are they going to find they don't need to admit it. I mean, it's a bit like Trump not conceding the election. Okay, forget the fact of what the election was, but it's that kind of thing. They just can't admit we've basically screwed the Western financial system. They can't bring themselves to admit it. They probably never will, but at some point it'll be that obvious to everybody. So, and that's the only answer. You either get to the table now and admit there's a problem and do something, which they won't, or you just have to literally, everything has to be destroyed. Everything we've ever understood, everything we've believed in, whether, even though most of it's an illusion and nonsense, we're at that position. So this complete collapse is just baked in the cake now, and we just have to sit there. Well, we do, observing this, understanding what it means. But there's no way you can save it, and that's why everything is dysfunctional. I mean, even the financial markets. There's people ditching, investment grade debt. I'm not saying you should invest it. Going, no, I'm just going to buy some penny stocks instead. No, I'm just going to go and buy some junk bonds. No, I'm going to invest in SPACs, stonks, and everything else. I mean, the kind of insanity that, as much as insane that the investment world is, I'm seeing things and I just go, this is exactly what happened in Weimar Germany. Precisely the same thing. People were throwing money into everything. They sucked all the masses, as many as they could. Okay, it was a lot less there, to invest in crazy ventures. And what's history shown us in the last 3 months? Exactly the same things happened. Everywhere we have in the UK adverts, get a spread betting account. You get your ISA, manage your own affairs, invest in stocks, and they make it look like, you're sort of betting £5 or $5 on the outcome of a sporting event. And it's that level of just drag everybody into this process. And it's just it's just indicative of the collapse. Yeah, and it's indicative of the collapse of everything.
Yep, and that's the whole entire thing here. The capacity of critical thinking has been completely lobotomized from the body politic. And here's where we are in the West. Nobody has solutions. Everybody's walking around with axioms. No real thought, no real solution in mind, no real direction in which way to go. And they're looking for these initiated few, these wizards of finance and these wizards in politics and shadow groups like Q that's going to lead us out of the darkness and into the glorious light. And that's just not going to happen. It's craziness. Ken, what are your thoughts on what's transcribing right now, the insanity that has gripped the West?
Well, what I saw something this morning, and it's pretty indicative of what, we're in the end, money talks and bullshit walks. Back in 2009, we had Occupy Wall Street. Today in 2021, we have the same individuals throwing all their money into Wall Street.
Yep.
So, that because of what they're in the course of doing, where money has no value, where jobs and value. Go back to I mentioned the fall of the Roman Empire. At least Europe had the foundation, a religious foundation. The church pretty much was able to help people hold on to some type of structure, fundamental structure through the Dark Ages before the Renaissance. Now, we don't have any spiritual foundation. We don't have any cultural foundation. We don't have any monetary foundation. There is not a single thing in Western society that it shows any type of promise that once we have this collapse, we're going to be able to get out of it. None.
Ken, I disagree with you. No, that's not true, Ken. We have 3,000 genders. You know a type of army you could raise with 3,000 genders?
I don't think any of them really know how to how to close a box to mail to Amazon, much less fire a gun.
But they could gender identify. They know all the Facebook pronouns.
You think Facebook's going to be hanging around after the collapse?
That's true.
I think the other thing that's the point is that you see pretty much all these, economists, the FinTwit community on social media, everywhere else, all these things, and they're framing everything as though it's just a reciprocal event in history, not actually asking themselves, hang on, we have never had this event in history. We have never had, it's an everything crisis now, it's an everything bubble. And they're going, well, it's a bit like interest rates go up a bit. Well, that's negative for gold. Yeah, it might have been in history, but hang on, we got this enormous debt bubble. So therefore, the rules of engagement don't apply the same anymore. But they just frame everything, because I think the truth is most people still think, no, somehow, just devalue the dollar 20% or 30% for a while, and then it'll all magically iron all the wrinkles out, and it'll be business as usual. And I just don't think most people have grasped the fact that that's not going to happen. It's an everything crisis, and it's not just
most people think it's an accounting error.
Well, yeah. It's not just a Weimar Germany crisis. It's a Weimar Germany crisis, well, pretty much globally, not entirely. But
this is going to make Zimbabwe look like Switzerland when this is done.
Yeah, and therefore the whole point is it's not like a problem that's just in one nation. It's a problem that's going to afflict most certainly engulf the entire West, and not just exclusively the West. But the Eurasian axis is at least making progress in the right direction. The one thing is they haven't got QE and zero interest rate policy, et cetera, et cetera. But if we define the entire West collapsing on every single level, then all idea of what happened in history is irrelevant. So just because interest rates apparently are rising, which actually is inflationary, which is good for gold, but that seems to have been also forgotten. Everything that's inflationary now is bad for gold, apparently. But anyway, we're sort of digressing, or I am, on the specific point. But in general, everybody's just focusing like, well, we'll somehow dig our way out of this because that's what happens. But these are uncharted waters. They're unprecedented times. Therefore, all the rules of engagement of the past don't apply anymore. But people still want to believe they do. But I'm sorry to say that's just not going to happen.
Absolutely. Ken, in terms of what's going on in the multipolar world, we've had Nord Stream 2 coming online. We have Sergei Lavrov throwing out that idiot Joseph Borrell from sending him packing to Brussels, and as well as a few other dignitaries thrown out of Russia. Russia and China seeming to move forward. The multipolar world's moving forward. There's advancements taking place. What are some of the things that you would want to highlight for the audience to, give a little compare and contrast between what's going on over there versus the insanity here, man?
I was just thinking about that before you brought up this topic. The one thing that stands out to me is you have to learn to fight. You have to know which battles to fight. The battle that Europe trying to fight Nord Stream, where the fact that once these pipelines come in, it's going to be cheaper and more beneficial to all of Europe with the energy needs they've had to deal with. Okay. You take a look at over the past 10 years, we've seen really peak production in the North Sea. We've seen OPEC now being taken over by Russia and OPEC plus. We have the Middle East no longer a playground for Europe and NATO to go ahead and dominate.
Right.
Then you see what happened immediately when Biden came in. They stopped the Keystone Pipeline. They stopped new leases on that. We have the grid problems come to bear in what happened in the storm recently in Texas.
What a joke.
And instead of, realizing that monkeying around with energy is the last thing you want to do. I mean, there are certain battles that you really shouldn't try to take on. This Green New Deal, listen to them. Put in more solar, put in more wind turbines, which obviously in winter don't work. The grid, about 10 years ago had when QE was being pumped out in mass, had they taken that $2 trillion, how many times over the past 12, 15 years have we heard presidents come out and say, we're going to have to do an infrastructure plan, create jobs, do $2 trillion to rebuild all the bridges and do all the infrastructure, and they kept pushing it off. They allowed the country to simply disintegrate.
Yep.
Now the new estimates are it's going to take $7 trillion just for the grid itself. Not to mention what the cost is going to be to rebuild the infrastructure around the rest of the country. Europe is in the same way. They're trying to fight windmills against, no pun intended, against the Nord Stream. But why not allow this to come about? They tried the gambit by saying we can get at Russia by cutting off the supply of energy coming through the pipelines in Ukraine. Well, we quickly saw which leadership is smarter than most of the Europe and Victoria Nuland. But because of the fact that they are going after the one lifeline, our lifeblood that pretty much runs everything and drives everything, they're destroying themselves with the basic fundamentals of the economy, that is energy. Really, there is no outcome I see at this point without absolute collapse of the political and economic structures of nearly every single country in the West before somebody wakes up and it brings about that partnership with Russia and China and accepting the fact that, the 20th century was a Western century, an American century. The 21st century is multipolar.
Yep, absolutely. The unipolar world is dead, and the population needs to really educate themselves, not only on what's going on, but my God, I worry about the future of the kids in this country, man. They're not being taught real mathematics, real sciences, real things that will make them more competitive in a global economy. And the only thing that they're being taught is all these intersectional politics and BS. It's not going to fare well. Paul, your thoughts on everything that's happening and where things are headed here?
Yeah, well, let's talk. I mean, with regards to the multipolar world, just in the last few months, we had the RCEP, enormous trade deal. It's the ASEAN nations and China. You have the huge trade deal between China, investment trade deal between China and actually, ironically, the EU. But just look every week. Every week, China's somewhere in the world. They've been quite active in Africa in the last few weeks, signing deals, signing cooperation agreements. And you can guarantee wherever China is, Russia is. They're just all over the world now. And the world wants to embrace this. And there's all this nonsense that China's putting nations in debt traps. No, that's what the World Bank and the IMF did, not the Chinese. And you contrast that, you've got the ongoing pilot scheme of the digital yuan, which is now being rolled out in the Middle East as in a pilot phase. It's being road tested now in Africa. It's being road tested in Hong Kong. The Russians are doing it privately and not telling anyone about it. And you're also seeing where whenever there's huge dumping of treasuries in the US, there's enormous amounts of Chinese or yuan denominated bonds being bought in China by the West. There's a huge amount of money that's moving out of the dollar into the yuan. There's enormous investment going on in Southeast Asia. I mean, let's not just focus on China. Vietnam's economy is booming, and what did Vietnam do? The West tried to persuade the Americans to do, turn their back on the Chinese, do things our way, and the Vietnamese went, "You must be joking. We're not doing it your way because your way's failed." And you just look at countless nations in the Eurasian axis. You look at the growth, the development, what they're doing, and we could spend literally days talking about this. I mean, because every week of every day there's some development. There's more and more big corporations in the West who are now trading with China in commodities, not in dollars anymore, in the yuan. And there's this big move where the Western financial system knows there's no future, so they want a piece of the Chinese pie as well, and by extension, Southeast Asia. So these are all the positive developments. And then, as we say in the West, everything's just the opposite, which we said, everything's just collapsing, imploding. And all the things that the West no longer values as important is the multipolar world values this as important. And obviously, Africa's a great one. There's enormous challenges there. There's huge strides that need to be made in the right direction, but they're moving in the right direction. Some countries faster than others. And it's a long work in progress, but at least they're going in the right direction. All we're doing in the West is just descending into chaos and not observing any of the problems that are facing us. And what are we doing? We just believe it's business as usual, so we'll just keep doing the same things, and that will miraculously resolve the problems. Whereas, and the more, I mean, you highlight Nord Stream 2. It's a great example where the Americans, in their infinite stupidity, was trying to persuade Europe, obviously, buy our LNG, which is 40% more expensive. And Europe's no, well, actually, we want to buy the Russian LNG, and then trying to threaten to sanction Europe because it's in your best interest not to buy Russian LNG. But here's the kicker for Europe: is the Russians said to them, if you don't want our LNG, we don't give a damn. Don't bother. And the Americans are like, what? Because Russia's going, we could guess where we're going to sell our LNG if you don't want
the east. The pipelines are running east.
Yeah, Southeast Asia will buy everything up
bigger at the market, Paul. It's a bigger market. It's more vibrant. It is cash flush, and it is ready to rock and roll. Whereas Europe is dying. The old man of Europe is dying.
And that's the part these Atlanticists, these idiots in Europe and America, didn't actually. They're stood there going, oh, hang on a minute. So even if this pipeline had never happened, we're not going to economically damage Russia. And you can imagine in the Kremlin, they're sat there going, are they really this stupid? But unfortunately, on some level, unfortunately, they're so incompetent, narrow-minded, ignorant, arrogant. They don't have a clue what's going on. It's like rather 2014, let's put sanctions on Russia because we can destroy Russia. Russia went, fine, we'll just de-dollarize. We'll just move our export market to the new part of the world where people want to buy our goods. They don't want to threaten us all the time. We can trade in not dollar terms. And Europe's now going, hang on, we're suffering economically. And the Russians going, well, why should we bring all the business back? You've made your badge, you can lie in it. But this is the problem. The West is just living on the past. And unfortunately, that's what empires do. It's what Britain's done since its empire collapsed. To a large extent, it still lives under this delusion that it's an empire. It's a nation of prominence in the world, that somehow it can flex its muscles and the world's going to listen to it. But that's what empires do. And sometimes empires just refuse to admit they've got it all wrong. And the West is still in that position, and it still thinks we can pump QE forever. It will never create inflation. We can have zero interest rate policy. That's not a problem. And we'll just keep doing this because one day it'll all normalize and the Western world will return to normal. And all this debt won't matter. Yeah, and they literally believe this. And not realizing that, in fact, just look at the logic of it. If you're, if I was $500,000 in debt, what's the point in giving me another 500,000 and another 10 million, 50 million, 100 million? If I'm in debt and because my business operations fail, my business isn't going to suddenly succeed because you've given me $100 million. I'm just going to spend it all on the business. It'll still fail. And in very crude terms, that's the problem the West faces. And of course, it wants everybody to oppose what the East is doing. Why? Because it's the ascendant empire, and once the West is gone,
well, Paul,
it's gone forever. You're not going to resurrect it magically. 6 months down the line.
Right, because we have better paper fraud, Paul. Maybe that's what they need. They need to learn how to manipulate paper. Because paper is our greatest economic driver. Not only is our paper great for plastering our entire financial industry with, Paul, but we lead the world in trash and recyclables. Maybe they should follow our model. I mean, what does the East have that we don't? A physical economy? Who needs that?
Well, yeah. Well, it's a bit like China has the digital yuan, and the West suddenly goes, well, we need a central bank digital currency. And
Fed coin's coming.
And they're going, well, what do you need it for? I don't know. We just need one.
We just need one.
It's a bit like everyone's going, well, they're going to replace the dollar with a digital dollar. And hang on, do you realize that it already is a digital dollar? I mean, what do you think the point of this is? But it's just like, it's a knee-jerk reaction, and they don't really even know what they're doing. I mean, yes, arguably, if you had a digital currency that sits alongside, then for international payments, etc., it can be a lot more efficient. It's a lot cheaper, and that's a plus point for it. But the idea that you're going to create a digital currency and replace the other one, and that's what people keep. I mean, I get people saying China's having a digital yuan because they're controlling their people. And it's a controlling mechanism for the world. I'm like, hang on, do you realize they're not getting rid of the yuan? It's a direct exchange. One yuan in your bank account is one digital yuan. You're still going to be able to go and draw cash out the bank. An interesting thing about the old cashless society, the US is printing record amounts of $100 bills. That doesn't strike me as a nation that's getting rid of cash anytime soon.
Again, Paul, you and I both know they can't get rid of cash. How are they going to pay off the cartels and the drug cartels and the terrorist organizations? How are they going to do that?
Yeah. Well, some people would have you believe they'll use cryptocurrency. Anyway,
idiots.
Let's not go into. But this is the fundamental problem we have is that the West is just doesn't have a clue. It has no direction. It's rudderless.
It has no culture, Paul, and that's the problem.
No, it is true. I mean, having spent time in China and Russia, and they've retained. Okay, we're not saying they're perfect nations, far from it. But the point is, when you see the people, they have a culture, they have an identity, and it's something that I've not seen in Western nations for a very, very long time. And this has been a decline that's gone on for probably the large part of my life, and it's been just obviously. And I think the 90s was sort of mid 90s for me, was a big turning point. You started to see that the West was just, and then losing its identity, and then we had the .com era, and it's obviously just utter nonsense, and we just follow it through that sort of whole process for the last 25 years, but the truth is the West's been collapsing since before World War II. I mean, the US was in terminal decline prior to World War II.
Right.
And people go, that's impossible. But just what do they think the Great Depression was?
Right, exactly.
And then it's just fudged its way through. the US decided to be the world sheriff after World War II by trying to take advantage of crippling the rest of the world with debt. But it wasn't in a position. The truth is, for me, the US should have now, probably this point in history, be becoming the ascendant power. It shouldn't have done it, in sort of prior and post World War II. It wasn't sufficiently evolved in its capability to do the things it should have done. But if the US had another 75 years of learning and understanding, it could have then taken on the mantle of doing things. And I think they would have done things very, very differently. But they saw an opportunity, they took it, but it was flawed from day one, and they were making extremely bad judgment calls from the moment Bretton Woods was announced.
Right, Ken. What do you have to say as we're coming down to the wire on this hour?
Yeah, it's interesting getting back to what Paul said about Russia and their LNG. Just out today, Gazprom is expecting to double its LNG exports by 2025. So, it doesn't matter what Europe wants, doesn't matter what the U.S. wants.
We're putting up more windmills in Texas, Ken. Take that, Gazprom.
Well, think about this too. Okay, there's another article that was out today. The amount of wealth, and I love this because everything has gone Orwellian. Debt is now called wealth. But who since we've done this pandemic, this lockdowns and everything in Europe and the United States, who is the one country that has really seen economic growth to a massive scale, even above what they were doing before?
China.
Obviously, China. And just in the last year, China has doubled the amount of billionaires that come out of the U.S.
Hold on, Ken, they're communists. How can communist countries have billionaires?
Well, despite the fact that the United States, the Fed, has printed more money out of nowhere to what? Fund the airlines, to fund the corporations, to, it's kind of ironic, isn't it? Because all they ever talk about is how Bill Gates is worth more, and Bezos is worth more, and Musk is worth more. Why aren't they creating new ones? And yet, because why? Because the United States has to buy everything from everyone. Yep. Boeing has just proven that they don't even know how to build an airplane anymore.
I refuse to fly Boeings these days, Ken.
Teslas are absolute crap, and they've just been superseded by all these new electric cars that are coming out of Europe and China.
Yep.
The ability for the United States to even produce something of bare bones quality is out the window. So is it any wonder that just like the furloughs that are going on in Britain, there's really no purpose purpose at all for Americans to even get a job, because our productivity is absolutely in the absolute garbage. So with that being said, is there anything to come out of a collapse? I really don't see that. And even the military industrial complex, after the Cold War ended, they needed to find something else. So they created the War on Terror. Well, guess what? The War on Terror is pretty much done. Right. I mean, who really is standing out that the U.S. has to keep sending troops go to? Nowhere. Pretty much most of the real terrorism and the terrorism groups have pretty much fallen to little tiny skirmishes here and there. So there's really no bogeyman for the U.S. to try to create. Yeah, they're going after Russia and China, but Europe and the rest of the world is saying, like, yawn, no big freaking deal. So the U.S. has now got to print all this money just to sustain the debt that they have, and they've got nothing at all that they can actually put it towards that's going to be any type of productivity or to keep U.S. hegemony going. The point of diminishing returns at the U.S. probably took place in 2018. Even though it was really going, a few years before that. But what stands out to me and something to look forward to is the high inflation, rushing towards hyperinflation, I think really is not that far away, period.
Nope, we're going to have Dow 50,000. We're entering the realm of negative interest rates. That's going to happen. That's right around the corner. And universal basic income. It's going to be wonderful. It's a whole new world. And yet the physical economy and what's left of it will die the death of 1,000 cuts. Gentlemen, I would like to postulate that we are a third world country. We have third world country infrastructure. And we have a third world country president as well as body politic. And the only thing that's missing in this equation, gentlemen, is a third world currency. And I think that's going to be remedied very soon.
Well, yeah, I think the problem is it's like we've got punch drunk on debt so much that it's like people. I mean, it's very reminiscent as I talked earlier about the budget. Sunak being Father Christmas, effectively. The problem is people have forgotten that this is either debt or it's just printed money. They don't understand what the concept of printed money means, what it actually means for your currency, what it actually means for your economy. And it's like there's millions of people furloughed, and they don't ask the question, why am I furloughed? I'm furloughed because I don't have a job. So effectively, the government's been paying millions of people here universal basic income, which means 80% of their salary for nigh on a year, and it's going to carry on till probably September, and after that probably forever and a day. So the issue is why people don't understand it, because okay, I understand people don't understand or have any desire to understand anything to do with economics, finance, but they need to ask the question: where is all this money coming from? And it's public knowledge that they've just printed. I think last year, in the first 3 quarters of 2020, the Bank of England printed £300 billion. Well, it's probably I wouldn't know what they did in Q4, what they're doing in Q1 of 2021. But look at the United States when this stimulus or lack of stimulus package comes out. The US will have pumped $6 trillion, and what's it done for the economy? 800,000 people losing their job every week. The point is, it's doing nothing. You could print $10 trillion, $50 trillion. It's not going to do anything because, again, you could give me, who's bankrupt, as much money as you like. I'm not going to stop being bankrupt. I'm more bankrupt, even though that doesn't make sense. I'm more in debt. I'm not dug out of this hole. And until we get back to the fact that we understand what it is we need to regenerate an economy, and this idea we just throw endless money at it, which obviously Yellen will be very keen to do, Biden will be keen to do, and so will Lagarde, etc., etc. That is not the answer to anything, but people have been conditioned to believe that somehow debt isn't debt anymore. In fact, it's a credit on your account, and
yeah,
and that's what
I
the
need
last
to go out and get more debt.
produced.
I think I'm going to go ahead and buy myself a Rolls Royce. I need more debt in my life, Paul. It's wealth.
Yeah, but it's like there's people going into debt and then speculating on penny stocks. I mean, and not like a few $1,000s. I mean, there's horror stories with the whole sort of fallout of GameStop and everything. There was people like $700,000 in debt, bankrupt. Yep. People subsequently taking their own lives because, but we've created this culture now that that's perfectly acceptable. Yeah. Debt will resolve the problem, and not actually realizing that isn't how it. Yeah. If you've got a solid business model and someone wants to loan you money because they've looked at your business plan and it's viable, and you're going to use that capital to buy equipment, and the equipment will then be the sort of engine of your business, and you're going to generate business and you're going to make profits. I mean, heaven forbid, and a business that makes profits, a business that's a viable model. What happened to that ethos? It's gone. But that's the whole basis. Where now it looks to me as though they're just going, just print as much money, throw it at everything, Doesn't matter whether the business is failing. We can't allow businesses to fail. So just keep throwing more and more money at it. Oh, and as I tweeted, there's nothing remarkable anymore about the US debt threshold crossing 28 trillion, because in a few months it'll be 30 trillion, and then when it's 30 trillion, we'll all be wondering when it's going to be 33 trillion.
But we'll do more. We'll do more financial accounting gymnastics to make it look all pretty to sell it to the American people, Paul. Real quick, CJ, how much more time do we have?
We're good.
Oh, perfect. Good.
Hey, real quick, let me throw something in there as well. I just came across, I on a whim, I just decided to do a search. And guess what? The fastest growing industry in 2020 for the UK, Ireland, the United States, and a couple of other countries.
Gender reassignment surgery.
No. OnlyFans and sex work.
Oh, God.
Are the fastest growing industries in 2020. And the University of, or Ohio State University has just started a new class on how, it's under the gender studies thing, how to set up your OnlyFans and exploit your sexuality for money.
I'm done.
This is the West.
I'm in 10 years. I'm out of here, guys. I'm heading to the multipolar world. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I don't think you could. I think at this point things are pretty irredeemable. I just can't. I can't. Paul, I don't know what to do, Paul. I think I've had it.
Well, the problem is, the biggest concern is we know everything's going to collapse. The issue is who in the West is going to be in the position to make the really tough choices, but do it in an intelligent and responsible way to say, okay, what are we going to do to dig our way out of this? Because even if you have intelligent leadership, and I mean, whatever people think of Putin, it's 20 years now, Russia, that he's been more or less trying to reshape Russia. Russia's, it's a vast nation in geographical size, but what's it, 160 million people? Well, that's a fraction of the population of Europe. It's less than half the population of the United States. And they're having problems. And what's the one thing Russia's got? Enormous resources, which Western nations, a lot of them don't have. So they have a big advantage. It's taken them 20 years. How long is it going to take us as a collective, whether it's the US, the UK, or mainland Europe? How long is it going to take us to dig our way out of the mess? Because I don't actually see anyone out there who has the capability to do this. And therefore, what happens? We'll just have, it's like the tried and trusted method of just doing what we've done in the past, even though it never worked, because miraculously it will. The only thing I will say with Sunak is there was big calls for the fact that it looked like he was going to tax everyone into oblivion on the back of this enormous money printing. Well, they haven't done that. They've deferred that, so at least that's one slight positive. But until we have a change of attitude and direction and an understanding of what it is we need to do, we could spend the next 20 years and we'll make no progress. And it's not just how we deal with the economics and how we attract, the multipolar world investment into Britain, and we build trusting relationships again with most of the world that doesn't trust us about anything. How we redefine our entire societies, our education system, everything. I mean, I'm looking at that going, can we make any progress in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And at the moment, we could be looking at 50, 100 years and still be going, well, when is someone actually going to do something productive? Now, I don't literally mean that, because at some point there is going to have to be an understanding of the magnitude of the problem. But if it takes Russia 20 years to get to where it is now, how long is it going to take us to get to where we need to be? And you're talking at least 10, 20 years, because we don't have a lot of the problems Russia had. Well, but we have a whole bunch of other problems they did.
But we don't have the leadership Russia has either.
Yes,
correct. And,
exactly.
And we're completely balkanized. They rallied around a homogenous culture, ideal, and outlook. Number one, and number two, Culturally, they're completely different. They're not a population that's been lied to their entire existence. They're a population that has faced and fended off invaders, foreign invaders. They suffered, they struggled a lot, and they know what it takes. This country, on the other hand, nothing. We've been taught that we're exceptional standard. We're exceptional and we're different. We're the city on the hill and blah, 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 blah. What's going to happen to these people when that bubble bursts? When that myth, and it is nothing but a myth, when you take it apart, what's going to happen? That's the question, gentlemen. It's going to be shocking for most people. I don't think it ever comes back, man.
Well, the problem is you're going to have this enormous meltdown in society of people who simply won't, because it's true. I mean, if you look at let's just take the UK as an example. People have not suffered real adversity to the extent we're going to in the future since World War II. Yeah, this country was under siege, and they were very tough times. But that's 76 years ago. There's not many people left now who lived through the war, who of an age where children of course lived through the war. I'm not saying that, but if you look at the adult population who lived through the war, I mean, if they were 20, when the war ended, they're nearly 100 years of age now. Most of these people aren't with us anymore. And I had neighbours who were in their 90s who have now passed on, and the wisdom that they had of living through that time and their understanding, that's gone with all these people who've passed away. So we now have a society in the West of people who've never had to deal with real adversity. I mean, as one person said to me only recently, adversity in the West is when your Wi-Fi goes off and they have a meltdown. Yep. And it's not a joke; it's literally reality. So, where is the backbone that is going to want to rebuild a nation? And because most people are going to sit there after they've been economically wiped out, and the ones who are still mentally cognizant enough to handle that, they're all just going to sit there and go, well, what are you going to do for us? It's all, what are you going to do for us, the government? How are you going to solve this problem? Not, we all need to roll up our sleeves and work collectively as a nation to fix this. That kind of dynamic is gone, and it's the one big difference that China has and Russia has, and because they've lived through enormous periods of upheaval, and lived in abhorrent situations. I mean, people in the West like to think that somehow it's kind of still in China and Russia the way it was, during, in the 1940s, etc. Well, I hate to disappoint you, but go and see what it's really like. But they have this collective backbone. They have this collective desire that, the country matters, and we will do everything collectively to make the country succeed. We'll make the sacrifices when we have to. We'll do what we need to do when we need to do it, because they passionately, actually, genuinely, really care about their nation, and not in a sycophantic, I'm a patriot, which to me means nothing.
It means nothing at the end of the day. You're a patriot.
No, yeah. It's actually one, and we don't have that in Western nations. People are totally disenfranchised, and the question is, where are those people in the future who are going to grab the UK or the US or Europe, mainland Europe, by the scruff of the neck and say, what are we going to do about it? And we've said this before. Where are they? I don't see them. I certainly don't see anyone in the political establishment, because most of them are either bought and paid for, or frankly, you wouldn't put them in charge of, to coin a very crude phrase in the West, a piss up in a brewery.
Exactly.
Which that's the problem. So where are these people? At least in China's a great example. It's a meritocracy. Their leaders have earned the right to do the things that they're, and okay, it's not for us, their political system, but it works for the Chinese. The Chinese people like it, and they're reaping the benefits. We don't have any political system that's geared to do anything that benefits any of us. And when is that going to change? I mean, you just look at the monumental challenges, and you're absolutely right. I don't see any, unless there's some miracle literally happens, where there's some group of people out there, or there's a collective of people who have an understanding and know what to do. But I think most people in the West will sit there and go, I don't know what to do. You tell me what to do. It's not my job to do anything. well, where's my job? What are you going to do? How are you going to support me? And well, I have to think for myself. I mean, what, we're going to have an education system that actually makes challenges you and doesn't give you a bit of piece of paper just because you turned up at school. I mean, as I say, we have the most highly paper qualified Western world now, and the least educated Western nations in history, in modern
No, we
history.
are. We definitely are. Ken, what your thoughts on what just Paul just mentioned and what the future outcome is? I for one think that look, look at the current crop of teachers that are being educated right now in the colleges and universities that are taking on teaching jobs. They're idiots. I mean, apart from a massive systemic overhaul, maybe in 150 years, maybe we might start coming up again to some sort of prominence. What say you, Ken?
Yeah, America was built this melting pot. Diversity was a big thing, but the key aspect in all of this is that those who came into the country wanting to be American, not to be balkanized and separate. Unfortunately, today's definition of diversity is that balkanization, that's separate. And what really started out maybe 20 years ago with this big diversity movement has now separated itself, where everybody is completely segregated into so many different factions, and that society itself cannot sustain or across the board. In the 1970s, I remember there was a concerted effort in Europe, especially when the EU was starting to just build itself. There was a concerted effort to bring in a bunch of refugees from old colonial powers. Well, those individuals never wanted to integrate into the country they were moving to. We see this in Paris, where it's a divided city. We see this a lot even in London, where Sharia law in some parts of London is allowed to flourish. We're seeing this balkanization. The U.S. did this at the Civil War. The South wanted to keep slavery and wanted its way. The North was separate. We had this big war, and for about maybe 70, 80 years, it was a sort of tete-a-tete about it. Now the balkanization in America has gotten extreme. Paul and I have talked about this before. The Constitution was originally signed and created when we were only 13 states, 13 colonies, 13 states. It's really not built for an America the size it is today. It's not to be ruled by a centralized power. It's everything regional is different in its own capacity. That, to me, is going to be something that we're going to see in the future. Diversity and segregation has torn the country apart, and the way it's going to reemerge is we are going to see this balkanization. I don't know if it's necessarily secession, but it will be a separate regional-based United States. I think we're going to see the same thing come out of Europe when all is said and done. China and Russia recognized that, yes, we do have different ethnic groups within our borders, but if they do not integrate into and accept the country that they're sustaining in, then there's no point in placating them. And it's any wonder that, they've, up to a point, they've been persecuted. You have to make sure that any type of diversity that comes about looks at the whole, the nation as a whole, the benefit of the nation as a whole, not the benefit of certain individual rights for somebody who gets offended, et cetera, ad nauseum. There are so many different things about what is taking place right now, this fourth turning or whatever you want to call it. The world is changing at a point that only has happened a few times in history, whether it's the fall of the end of the Bronze Age, the end of the Iron Age. We're starting to see the end of just civilization as a whole. And those who have been prepared, holding on to their foundations. I mentioned this in a discussion with Paul the other day. Russia believes in a doctrine of are continually evolving to the modernization, but holding on to the foundations of your past. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why Russia has almost always been, because of their history, more tied to Asia than it is to Europe.
Exactly.
And when they under Peter the Great, when they started focusing on Europe instead of Asia, they ended up becoming puppets for the regimes and kingdoms that were running Europe. Now that they've decided to go back and create Eurasia, because that's where the center of global power really is, they have set the blueprint and the model of what the future system is going to be, and it's going to take collapse. You can no longer reform the West. It must be razed to the ground. There's going to be tens, if not hundreds of millions of people that die from this. And only then, when you go back to the foundations and of what made you who you are, the people you are, the civilization you are, once that gets reestablished, then you can move forward.
Exactly.
And where the fall of the Soviet Union, it took 20 years to build, modern day Russia. It's going to take a lot more for the West to recover.
Very well said, and that's how you make America great again, folks. Paul, closing thoughts. We got 30 seconds. Paul, you, and then Ken. 30 seconds, and we got to close it. Go ahead, guys.
Well, I think 30. The only thing, all we can say is that this is an ongoing debate. There is a huge amount more that can be discussed, but at least for anyone listening, this is a brutal reality check. And I'm not saying people listening don't have the reality check already, but that's where we're at and we need to start acknowledging we have enormous problems, and we're not going to resolve it in any way, shape, or form with any current policy decisions, whether it's economic, financial, political, in terms of health, education, the whole thing has to change. And until we acknowledge that we've completely failed, then unfortunately we just have to descend into the abyss and then pick it up from there. I'd rather we could put the brakes on it, which you could do if there was an acknowledgement, and then you don't have to have absolute collapse. But I don't see there's any other way out of it, because Western nations just simply won't accept the fact that they've ever made these horrendous mistakes, which they've done pretty much for since World War II. Predominantly, the West completely failed at everything it's attempted.
Correct. Paul, 30 seconds. Ken, 30 seconds. Go for it.
Oh, I think I said my piece, so we're good to go.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, I agree with both of you guys. We have a work cut out for us, and like I said before, we are just like a nation that if the oceans of the world were to dry up tomorrow, gentlemen, we will still be building submarines, and we'll have a bucket brigade that will go around the street corner from connecting a fire hydrant, and they'll have a bucket brigade pouring water on that submarine, and those people on that bucket brigade will be paid the minimum wage of $15 an hour, because that's just what we do. That is the West in a nutshell. If the oceans of the world were to dry up tomorrow, we would still be building submarines. And with that being said, CJ, take it away.